Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. So thanks everyone on behalf of Rocky Mountain Institute and World Resources Institute. Welcome to everyone that's joining the workshop today, both local government staff as well as community groups that are able to join. What we're going to focus on in this first workshop is developing the necessary partnerships for an inclusive Solarize campaign, since that is the necessary kind of first step in this process. A note that we are recording this presentation and we'll integrate that into the private cohort webpage that we have for cohort participants, but we'll just be recording the presentations and not the breakout groups and discussion. Okay, for a quick introduction on Rocky Mountain Institute and World Resources Institute, the two organizations that have partnered on this effort. I'm Ryan Shea, and I will be co-leading this Solarize aspect of this cohort, along with Tushar Khurana, who will also be co-leading and presenting today. And then we have Arthur Coulston, who's going to be leading the solar app portion of the cohort, starting in a few weeks or months. And Arthur and Alex Dane will be helping facilitate some of the breakout discussions today. And then we'll have Tatatam Goncalves, who will also be helping with technical assistance with kind of the Zoom technical aspects as we get started. Okay, so we have three desired outcomes today for the participants in this cohort. The first one is really just to understand the cohort structure and have a chance to meet some of the cohort participants. Second, we'll want participants to be able to understand, mostly at a high level, some of the aspects of an inclusive Solarize-like campaign and how this cohort will be integrating those aspects in through multiple workshops. And then the main outcome from this workshop will be for participants to develop a plan to build the necessary campaign partnerships that will be required before the Solarize teams can kind of be developed and setting goals and roles and responsibilities in our next workshop. And these three outcomes led to the agenda for today, which first is going to be, I will be providing an overview of the cohort and allowing participants to give some introductions and some breakout groups to get to know each other. And then next, we'll have Tushar give a brief overview of what Solarize and Solarize-like campaigns look like and aspects to make them more inclusive at a higher level. And then we'll have a half hour for two presentations. First from Laura Rigel from the Philadelphia Energy Authority, and then Corey Ramsden and Angela DeMonvran from Solar United Neighbors. And they will both be speaking through their experiences in their successful Solarize or solar co-op programs on how they've had the necessary partnerships in place to incorporate equity throughout. We'll have some time dedicated for specific communities to be in their own breakout room to go through some breakout exercises and work through a worksheet that we've developed for this virtual workshop. And then lastly, just some quick next steps. So first, diving in to a little bit more on the cohort overview. To take a step back, the Rocky Mountain Institute and World Resources Institute formed a partnership about 2 years ago to form the City Renewables Accelerator team. And this was largely funded from Bloomberg Philanthropies with a common goal of really helping US cities advance their ambitious renewable energy goals. And the two avenues that we have been going through to do that is first through some one-on-one city engagement with some of the cities that were selected in the American Cities Climate Challenge. And then the second aspect has been the city cohort model, where we bring together any US city that's interested in the specific project that we're focusing on in the cohort and helping those cities walk through the process of implementing that project in that cohort. So I know some of the cities and counties in this cohort were also in our previous municipal on-site solar cohort and or off-site PPA cohort. But this cohort specifically will be again, focusing on accelerating residential solar adoption. So diving into that, the specifics on what you can expect in these virtual workshops is that each workshop will have three main kind of aspects to the content. The first is with the peer learning that we're providing in these workshops. So both hearing from local governments that have been successful in the past, community organizations and experts, to just kind of learn from each other throughout this whole process. And second, we'll be providing worksheets and templates in every workshop to help you through this process. So I've listed some worksheets and templates there. And for this first workshop, we'll be utilizing a partnerships worksheet that we've developed that are mostly just some questions to help you all think through the necessary partnerships for an inclusive Solarize light campaign. And the last note here is that all of this content, the workshop recordings, the worksheets and templates, as well as detailed written guidance, will be integrated into a private webpage on our website, cityrenewables.org. And I'll follow up through email after this workshop with a password to access that page. That page will have all the information, and you can also share that with your community partners to help them kind of step through the process as well. So now that I've spoke to a little bit about what you can expect in the virtual workshops, I wanted to provide a brief overview of what workshops we'll be providing. And each workshop will be a step in the process of developing these inclusive Solarize light campaigns. So today, obviously we're focusing again on the partnerships here. And then after the partnerships have been developed, then the next workshop will be focused on working with community partners to develop the roles and responsibilities around the structure of the team and setting goals, then reducing financial barriers for lower income residents, developing the RFP, developing the campaign platform and logo and kind of information aspects, the communications and outreach plan, selecting an installer, and then preparing for the campaign launch. And then the last few months in April, May, and potentially June, we'll be having just ongoing workshops for people to kind of bring questions that they have about the ongoing management of their Solarize campaign. But these are the workshops that you can expect over the next 8 or so months, and the contents that we will be diving into. And again, today we'll be focusing on partnerships. Okay, so now a little more detail on the communities that are in, that were accepted into this cohort. We have 21 communities across 15 states and 5 time zones. So first, really, want to speak to the impact that I think that this cohort can have, specifically because these communities are committed to actually implementing a project, and span almost 12 million residents. And given that this model could hopefully be scaled, I think that the impact here could really be a big deal. And the other thing I think that's notable is that all of these communities are committed to accelerating residential solar and have a specific aspect of bringing the Solarize benefits of a typical Solarize campaign to historically disadvantaged communities. And there is some variance depending on, in one community, maybe that's an immigrant group or community of color, and another that might just be specifically low and moderate income residents. But there is this common goal of implementing an inclusive Solarize campaign, which is exciting. But we are very geographically diverse across 5 time zones, so we appreciate making the time for this, given that scheduling can always be difficult. But we're geographically diverse, and a lot of different aspects in every city as well that I'm excited to dive into.
Okay, so now we're going to jump into some of the content for today. In the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to go over what a Solarize or group purchasing program is, how we hope to design these Solarize programs in a way that's inclusive and benefits frontline communities, what barriers a Solarize campaign can and cannot address. And then I'll share some thoughts on both internal partnerships with city and county government, and then external community partnerships that will inform the worksheet and the breakout exercises that we do later in the session. Okay, So Solarize programs, they basically bring groups of neighbors together to save time and money while going solar. Solarize and Solarize-like programs come in many different flavors and go by different names. So for example, Solar United Neighbors, who you'll be hearing from soon, brings together solar co-ops. But there are really three core elements of the Solarize or group purchasing model. One is we have community involvement. So campaigns use different forms of local outreach to spread the word and educate people about going solar in order to get a group of people who wants to go solar together. Then you have this competitive installer selection process. So this group of people, either directly or through an organization, whether that's the city or a nonprofit, issues an RFP that represents this pool of buyers. An installer is selected based on both like the group discount they provide, but also other community priorities. And then you also have a limited sign-up window. So in order to get the best discount from the installer, there's this limited sign-up window, which also kind of incentivizes a large number of installations in a short period of time. That's really the basics of the Solarize or group purchasing model. Typical Solarize programs have failed to reach communities of color and low and moderate income communities. So, but I guess I would say the Solarize idea has been a really useful tool in breaking down barriers to going solar. And so we're really hoping to direct the benefits of a Solarize campaign towards LMI communities and communities of color. Which brings me to how we're hoping to make Solarize campaigns more accessible and inclusive. So we have three different strategies for that. One is we're hoping to have frontline communities at the core. So we want to be engaging with frontline communities, building partnership with community groups from the beginning so that they can participate in decision-making and help influence the campaign structure. Then we want to tailor outreach and education towards these marginalized communities. So whether that means focusing on specific neighborhoods or really developing targeted strategies with our community partners. And then a really important one is we really want to reduce financial barriers. So as part of the campaign, we'll be using whatever tools we can to maximize incentives, reduce upfront costs, provide accessible capital, lower credit score barriers. This is probably the most important part to making the campaign more accessible. And if we don't address this, then this is just not going to be accessible to LMI communities. So throughout this cohort, we're going to have workshops specifically dedicated to some of these strategies, but we'll also be trying to integrate them throughout each campaign. And then I think it's important to recognize from the start what barriers a Solarize campaign can and cannot address. Being transparent with these expectations and limitations is also going to be helpful as we reach out to communities and try to build trust. So some of the biggest barriers to solar come from people renting, living in multifamily homes, or not having suitable roofs. Most of our Solarize campaigns will be focusing on single family homeowners and will not directly address those barriers. So I'll note that some of our communities do have policies in place to include multifamily homes and renters, which is great, but there's nothing inherent in the Solarize model that's going to address those barriers. And I'd also add the clarification that when we say Solarize, we're not referring to community solar in the sense of the model where people can buy a subscription in a larger array. So then there's financial barriers to solar, income, credit, regressive solar incentives. And that's really something that our Solarize campaign is hoping to address. So it'll really depend on the specific policies and the partnerships we make, but we're really going to focus on that. So we'll spend workshop 3 specifically looking at financial barriers, and then we're going to keep building out those components and partnerships throughout the cohort. And then the strength of Solarize campaigns is really in local involvement. So if our campaigns are successful, we'll definitely have increased outreach and education. Hopefully we'll have engaged residents to have created this advocacy base. And then we'll also hopefully have created a new market interest in LMI communities and communities of color in our different cities and counties. All right, so for the remainder of this session, we're going to focus on what we think is the first element to building an inclusive Solarize campaign, which is building partnerships, both internally with government partners and externally with community organizations. The main reason we're focusing on partnerships in the first workshop is that particularly for community partners, we really want to be building these relationships from the start. And we want our community partners to be involved in decision-making and campaign structure. So first, on the internal partner side, we think it's really helpful to have buy-in from different local government departments. So having the mayor or top elected official appear at the campaign launch and endorse the campaign in a mailer is definitely a really effective way to spread the word. We'll want to be partnering with procurement team or department, let them know early on about the RFP because that could hopefully prevent any roadblocks since these kind of things can take time. We'll definitely want to be partnering with our communications department in outreach. And then there are probably a number of other departments within local government, community development, housing, human services, that already have existing relationships and partnerships and expertise that we want to tap into. All right. And I guess I also want to mention that we're going to be thinking about these partnerships and we'll be addressing them specifically in the workshops later in the session. Okay, so community partnerships are probably the last thing that I'm going to talk about, but also probably the most important. Some of us already have community partners on the call, which is great. And when we reach out and meet with community organizations, we really want to be speaking to how our campaigns can align with these needs and also be ready to incorporate their needs and change our campaigns. So again, we'll explore this further in the worksheet, but I'm going to briefly go over different ways in which a Solarize campaign can align with community priorities. I think, well, okay, yeah. I think what is most important to remember here is that many frontline communities want solar development to also be a vehicle for community empowerment. So Solarize campaigns are cool because they are really about community involvement and empowerment. They take this otherwise individual decision to install rooftop solar and they make it an exercise in community collaboration. So the benefits of these campaigns can really extend beyond the benefits of just a few individuals having residential solar. So what are these community priorities? Well, first on the solar side, rooftop solar creates clean, non-polluting energy, can lower energy costs, stabilize costs over time. Paired with storage, it can also meet resilience needs, which is important to a number of communities. And solar can also create job opportunities. So some Solarize programs are explicitly paired with job training, and others can at least prioritize installers that provide local jobs. Then there are different ways that a community can benefit from a Solarize campaign. So campaigns definitely will provide solar and clean energy education to the community. But another thing that's special about these campaigns is that a number of people end up going through the process at a number of different levels, whether that's residents, people in government, developers, other nonprofits. And that kind of creates this advocacy base and a group of people that will go on to advance other policies and programs. And so effective Solarize campaigns really become exercises in energy democracy. And then finally, these campaigns can also be opportunities for local governments to build partnerships and trust with the community, which is a desirable outcome in and of itself. Some Solarize campaigns might explicitly include efforts to build capacity within their community-based partners, which allows these organizations to take on future leadership roles. But I also really invite us to think about this Solarize campaign as a relationship building exercise that can lead to future projects with the community. Yeah, so hopefully this information is helpful as we think about shaping our campaigns and building partnerships, and it should inform the worksheet sessions that we do later in the workshop. Okay, so that's really the information that I had. So for the next section of the workshop, we have two organizations on the call with us who have been running successful, inclusive Solarize campaigns. and we'll be hearing from them about their campaigns and specifically about the partnerships they built. So we'll first be hearing from Laura Rigel, who is Solar Manager at Philadelphia Energy Authority, and then we'll be hearing from Corey Ramsden and Angela DeMonbren from Solar United Neighbors.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. It was great to see the introduction and see how thoughtful you are being about Solarize campaigns as you're putting them together across the country. I'll be sharing about Solarize Philly, which is the group buying program we've run since 2017 here in Philadelphia that we've had a lot of success with. So I'll start with just some quick background on our office, the Philadelphia Energy Authority, and then I'll dig into our low and moderate income solar program, which I think might be specifically of interest to this cohort. So as the Philadelphia Energy Authority, we were established in 2010, so we're a relatively new office, but we really see clean energy projects as a tool for impact on some of the greatest issues facing our city. Philadelphia is the poorest big city in the US, so we're really focused on addressing poverty and creating jobs and driving economic development through the clean energy projects that we're doing. In 2016, we kicked off the Philadelphia Energy Campaign to do just that. So we have a goal of creating 10,000 jobs over 10 years through clean energy and energy efficiency projects in Philadelphia, focus on the 4 sectors shown on this slide. And we've had a lot of success with that so far. Since 2017, we've invested $136 million in clean energy and energy efficiency projects such as a solar farm that will be powering city buildings, an energy retrofit of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, as well as some high schools, and then our Solarize program as well. So I'll dig into that specifically, but I'm happy to be in touch with folks afterwards who might have questions about other programs that we run. Today I'll be digging in on our Solarize Philly residential rooftop solar program. We kicked it off in 2017, really in response to calls from the solar industry. We heard that many companies were doing work in other parts of Pennsylvania, but not in Philadelphia because of an impression that it was difficult to do permitting an interconnection in Southeast PA. So because of that, and we knew that PICO, our local utility, and L&I, that does permitting locally, had made some improvements to those processes, we wanted to create a platform to bring contractors into the city to be doing business here. We also knew that the cost of solar had come down significantly over the past 10 years, such that it was finally to a point as of 2017 where you could finance a solar installation on a row home in Philadelphia and be paying the same or even a little less on a monthly basis for your solar loan compared to what you were spending previously on that electricity. So solar finally penciled out here in Philly. We wanted to get the word out about that to the public and drive job creation as well. So I'll speak about that later on, but just to give you the quick numbers, we've run the program as 4 rounds so far. So we're in the 4th phase of it this year. We've had 701 households sign solar contracts through the program, amounting to a $10+ million investment in our local clean energy economy. And as far as we can tell, this is the largest single Solarize campaign of its kind in the country. As one of the many components of Solarize Philly, we've introduced the Solar Savings Grant Program. And so just backing up quickly, I'll say that our priority in establishing Solarize Philly was to enable low and moderate income households to participate in the program. So we know that in Philadelphia, LMI households face a disproportionate energy burden, and we know that they stand to benefit the most from the savings that are derived from solar installs. So just like I was saying earlier in my presentation, LMI residential is actually one of the target sectors of the Philadelphia Energy Campaign, and our goal is to use these projects to get at some of these challenges that Philadelphia homeowners are facing, such as energy burden. So all that to say, we've built in a program fee to our Solarize Philly program where we're collecting 25 cents a watt, and that's funding our Solar Savings Grant Program. So we've actually created a revenue stream that has generated nearly $500,000 over the course of our program to date that's allowed us to build out this Solar Savings Grant Program. And through this program, we have established inclusive eligibility criteria where rather than looking at FICO score, we're requiring 12 months of on-time electricity bill payments as our underwriting criteria. And then anyone under 80% of AMI is able to participate. And then we've set it up so that we actually are covering about half of the project cost through a combination of sources, but including the program fees we've been collecting from other households. And then the remainder of the cost is financed through a local community development corporation, actually. So that piece I thought would be of particular interest to you all, just to break down how the funding is flowing for this LMI solar program. We have 3 sources of funds. So one is the program fees that I just mentioned, and the other 2 are a state grant from the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, which is supporting with our loan loss reserve to allow us to offer those really inclusive underwriting criteria. And then, like I said, we partnered with the Community Development Corporation, actually the Centennial Parkside CDC, to lend out the money to the household. So this is really unique. I don't know that I've seen this done before, at least not in Philadelphia, where in this case, the local CDC raised about $200,000 in grant funds. And their goal with raising those funds was actually to basically create a revolving solar fund to support LMI solar in Philadelphia. And so we, it was an excellent match with the program as we were kicking this off, because we realized it would be about half of the project costs that the participants could afford to finance and be paying less from month 1 of their participation in the program. So that was our goal, and we went to CDC, Centennial Parkside CDC. They set up a loan product in partnership with KNIFE that's actually servicing the loans, where they're lending out that grant money, and it's going to come back to CPCDC to use for future solar programs or future programs that benefit that low-income community in West Philly. So that's another benefit beyond the reduced electricity expenses for the participants in this pilot, is that we're generating funding that'll be coming back to a local community organization. And so we're using the funds for a combination of items, including, of course, the installation costs, but also a loan loss reserve, as I mentioned. And then we are also providing an operations reserve and a fund for biannual maintenance checks. And then, as I mentioned here, there's revenue generated from this for future rounds. And we know that there's the potential to actually leverage even more funds for this program that were not in this current iteration of it. One is the investment tax credit and accelerated depreciation. We were exploring going down that route with a financing partner where they had tax equity investors at the table. But it turned out that that was adding more costs than it was saving us, actually. So we're still interested, though, in figuring out how we might be able to take advantage of the tax credits. In this case, if a household is able to take advantage of the tax credits, if they're paying enough income tax to make that make sense for them, then they can do so, but it's not guaranteed. So we weren't able to count on it in terms of the savings for these projects. There's also a rebate in Philadelphia that's not funded currently due to COVID, but that could be an opportunity moving forward. So these are the partners that we've worked with on our LMI solar program, including, interestingly, to this William Penn Foundation, a tax credit provider, basically, and then Centennial Parkside CDC, and then the state, and this is Solar States, is our local installation partner, which has been really, really critical partnership through Solarize Philly, as well as for our job training program. So I'll dive into that just before I close out, which is that we use actually 21 cents a watt of the program fee to go towards LMI participation, and we use 4 cents a watt to go towards job training. We've been able to leverage that funding to unlock increasing amounts of funds to support training for young Philadelphians to install solar. So as we kicked off Solarize Philly, we heard from installers in the region that there was a scarcity of trained applicants coming forward for positions as they were posting them, and we knew, and our goal with Solarize Philly was to drive up the demand for solar installers so they'd only have more and more positions opening up. So with that in mind, we sat down with the school district here in Philadelphia and started a process which has led us to the point where we are today, which is that we just kicked off the nation's first solar energy 3-year vocational program for high schoolers here in Philadelphia. It's the first time in Pennsylvania that this has been done as a vocational solar program, and it's the most robust of its kind in the country in terms of the number of hours being delivered over 3 years between 10th and 12th grade. And so we're building out a solar lab at our local high school that'll house the program. And And this is building on work we've done over the past 3 years to be offering introductory training, which we realized was not quite enough to get students up to entry-level positions. So we've built it out even further to this full-fledged 3-year curriculum with the support of a Department of Energy award. And we're also using the Department of Energy award to train opportunity youth. So those are young adults that are not currently in school or employed. And that's in partnership with PowerCore PHL, which has been really critical to the program success. So in terms of partnership, I would emphasize that partnering with a local job training provider is really critical since they have the skill sets and the staffing to provide all the wraparound support that's really needed to set these young people up for success. And so we graduated our first class of 12 students in May 2020, and we had 100% placement rate of those students that we put into internships and jobs. So we're really proud about that, and I'm happy to share our curriculum toolkit with you if you're interested in looking at what we've done with the job training piece as well. So here's my contact information. I saw that a couple of comments came in. I haven't had a chance to look at them. I saw someone ask who's paying the fee. So I imagine you're referring to the program fee that I mentioned, the 25 cents a watt. So great question. We were able to negotiate the price down so significantly with our installers because of the group buying aspect of the curriculum, or sorry, of the program. The price was so significantly below market rate, we could pin this fee on top of it and have people still paying less than they would on the open market. So basically we were able to generate more than 25 cents a watt of savings such that the installer is building that into the cost that they're charging the customer. Does that make sense? Okay, and I see a couple people interested in the curriculum. So I'm happy to just make a point to share it with Ryan. As soon as the toolkit is ready for public distribution, I have an outline that I could share at this point, but we're set up to have it licensed to the Creative Commons and accessible to the public, which should be later on this fall. So I'll follow up with you on that. Any other questions?
Yeah, and I was just going to jump in to say we've got about 5 minutes set aside for kind of a short Q&A round, but given that we're trying to cover a lot in this workshop, feel free to add your questions to the chat and we can follow up with Laura after this workshop as well, because I know she has to jump at 3 p.m. Eastern as well. But yeah, feel free to put them in the chat or just unmute yourself to ask any questions specifically related to the partnerships aspects. We'll definitely dive more into the financing aspects in the third workshop, but yeah, opening it up now for any other questions.
Laura, did you know when you were at the outset that you would be able to layer that blend of partners that were providing funding or financing? Like, did you know that you were going to be able to layer program fees, state support, and the CDC support, or how did that kind of come together?
Yeah, we didn't know at the outset. We kicked off Solarize Philly for all households in 2017 and then set out to figure out the LMI component, knowing that we'd be having revenue coming in from the full paying households to help with that. And as we worked through the model, we were really emphasizing scalability as we were looking at designing that solar savings grant program. So we're actually hoping to be subsidizing a lower portion of the cost and take advantage of the ITC, like I mentioned, but we were not quite able to make that work. So in this case, we're financing half the cost. So those funds, we're not having to raise, so that's good. But for the rest, we have the funding available now through the state grant and through the program fees, but we're interested in creating it to be an even more scalable model moving forward. We're less dependent on raising money each time. We've seen through Posigen, maybe some of y'all are familiar with them, that they've been lending, basically financing solar projects for low and moderate income households, primarily in Louisiana and Connecticut, and they've had a lot of success. They've had less than 0.5% default rate. So we're really looking to prove that point here in Philadelphia, that you can finance solar for low-income communities. You don't need to be raising the money every time, so that we can really reach the scale that we need to. I see the question also about the ITC. That's a great question. I mean, it depends on, how the next several months go, I guess, on what we expect for the ITC moving forward, but we're still exploring it, thinking that it could get extended or renewed. But happy to talk about that with anyone who's interested in it, or if people have suggestions or partners there. For smaller scale tax equity investors, I think that was the challenge we ran into, is that tax equity providers tend to be looking for larger scale projects, and what we were doing here in the scattered site program. Yeah, and I see the question about COVID. That's another great one. We have allowed some lenience for households that had late payments during COVID. We're just following up with them to sort of check in on if COVID was a factor in them not making those payments. And we're looking back to prior payments pre-COVID to make sure that they were on track before COVID, but we are having some flexibility as a result.
Fantastic. Well, hello again to everybody. My name is Corey Ramsden. I'm the VP for Go Solar Programs at Solar United Neighbors. And so my work is involved in supporting all of the on-the-ground programs and offerings that we do in support of communities like yours. Joining me today in this presentation will be Angela DeMonbran, who's our Regional Field Director for our South by Southwest region, we call it. Angela, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Hi, I'm Angela DeMonbran. As Corey mentioned, I'm the Regional Director. I oversee our states and programs in Florida, Texas, Arizona, and Colorado. So, and lots of fun experience working with cities and counties and what this looks like.
Thanks. So I'm going to be going through slides in the next 10 minutes or so, talking about a little bit about us, and but mostly focusing on sort of the from a practical approach. I'm a practical person. Solar United Neighbors is a practical organization where we want to give you some steps, concrete steps on finding and really securing good partnerships with community groups in your area. So as I'm going through this, Angela will be the color commentary here. We'll stop periodically, and she'll give us her perspective from from our field organization. Really up first about who we are is really we're a group of people who are ultimately creating a network of individuals and businesses and people who are generating their own electricity. And by doing that, we are creating really a host of advocates who are both educated and directly connected to the renewable energy economy and willing to advocate in their own interest and the interest of their communities to increase adoption to renewables by advocating at the state and local level for policies. But that starts for us really in just that practical experience of helping people go solar directly. It's very much part and parcel of who we are. And we really got our start in a very organic fashion in Washington, DC a while back. In 2007, our executive director, her son, who's on the left here, Walter, and his friend, Diego, on the right, were super excited about going solar after seeing the movie An Inconvenient Truth. Their why was climate change. We work with communities and people all over the country. The whys are varied and different depending on the person. We're agnostic to that, but in this particular case, they were very motivated from that perspective, and they did some research and realized ultimately it was kind of confusing and challenging for them to go solar back then. So they did it as a group. They knocked on doors. They ultimately gathered a group that took between 40 and 50 homes solar in their community. And that kernel is really what we still do today, which is helping people use their collective buying power to go solar together, make that process a little easier and smoother than it might be otherwise, and ultimately increase adoption to solar, build a marketplace around it, and provide some competitive pricing for people along the way. We do that in 12 states, as you can see here, and are really expanded over the last 3 or 4 years to incorporate this same model in all the states where we operate. But today we're really going to be focusing specifically on some tips on finding partners and really sort of building those relationships. And we're doing this from the perspective of what we are, which are really community organizers. We are working within a community trying to build relationships and ultimately make sure that community members and community partners are getting something that fits and works for them, which is to go solar in a way that supports their community goals. So the first step in this, and there are going to be 5 steps here, but the first one seems pretty obvious, and it's something that you'll see in the worksheet that you'll get access to soon in the follow-up working groups, which is really just taking an account of who is in your community, what groups are out there, and really taking the time to map them out. You know, you might have a community group that's in one part of your town or your city, and they might have a particular reach in certain communities, or either demographically or geographically. And there may be other ones that are in other parts of the community, right? So you want to create as broad a web as possible so that you get that reach of people, and with organizations that have a trusted voice in that community and who are willing and interested in promoting this effort. So just mapping that out is a really useful exercise to that. And I'll stop there for a second. Angela, you know, from your perspective, how does this typically work when you work with municipalities as far as, you know, making this list and seeing who's out there to support an effort?
Sure. Well, it can come from either our experience on the ground. If we've worked in that area before, we can share with you. We've coordinated with a specific number of partners. We'll also lean on cities to help us form this list. If there are nonprofit organizations or other organizations that say have clean energy goals or a community educational goal, for example, in Florida, we work really closely almost on all of our co-op programs with the League of Women Voters of Florida. It's a community educational type of organization, and so they're a great example, as well as the Sierra clubs and non-traditional partners, and also the NAACP here in Florida. So we can help you form that list, but yes, that's the start. And reaching out to those organizations, engaging their level of support and commitment, and it could be as simple as sharing about the program on their Facebook page, or it could be something bigger, participating in the co-op launch. So as well as the map. So you want to define what the geographic region will look like. Will it be countywide? Will it just be the city proper? And that's something you definitely want to identify with your Solarize program manager or whoever the partner is, and what that looks like early on.
Yeah, if you are thinking, and this is maybe a side thing to the partnerships, but if you are thinking about expanding that map, also just keep in mind permitting variances between jurisdictions. If you're working across multiple ones, just want to understand what those differences are. Sometimes they can affect pricing in the bidding process, which we'll talk about in future workshops.
Yeah, and I'll also add really quickly that map piece too. You make it, if it's too big, too broad, then that could affect the pricing that you may receive the installer bidding on your project if the geographic region is too much to travel to conduct all of the site visits, for example.
So step number 2 in this process, which we talked a little bit about already, is make that contact. Start connecting the dots between organizations. You might have direct relationships with some of them. Some of those organizations may be able to connect you to other organizations that they think may also be interested. So that process is really just, you know, as you normally would be doing, setting up calls, getting to understand a little bit more about where they are and what their needs are, which brings us to step 3. And this is, I think, the most important of these steps. You know, Tushar mentioned earlier about aligning priorities with those of the community. And this is really one of the key points of doing that is taking the time to listen to what the community organization and what members in that community are looking for. It might be that their focus is really about job creation and workforce development. There may be some interest or some concerns about resiliency of the electric system, and, you know, some interest in figuring out ways to help community members when utility power is out. Whatever those reasons are, whatever those needs are, is listening to those and then looking for opportunities to build a campaign that acknowledges and incorporates those needs to ultimately build those partnerships and make them stronger. It's a really important part, and one of the great things about Solarize and about co-ops and the way that we run them as well is there's flexibility there in how that works, and that flexibility really comes from what partners and supporting actors in the campaign look for and what they need as part of this outreach. Angela, any particular examples you can think of from your work where a partner really had a concern or something that brought up that really strengthened the campaigns that we've done?
Oh, sorry, I'll kind of take a step back and note that, you know, our process is really a community driven one. So it's really all about listening to whether it's a volunteer, a partner organization, in this case, a city that wants to bring us into their community. It starts from that. It's truly a community-driven process from beginning to end, and then our process is really continuing to listen and respond to the individual participants thereafter. So yes, that's critical. What is important, and even when we get to the stage of a sign-up web page, those individuals that sign up actually indicate what's important to them. So everything is factored in. Again, a complete community-driven process, and here in this case, it starts with listening to the cities that we'll be working with and what's important to you, your ideas on where we should target, and the like.
The fourth step here is gauging commitment from partners. You might find, and you will find, that different organizations you talk to have different levels of interest, but also different levels of capacity to be able to support. It's a good idea to sort of make sure you have a sense of who is able to do what. And one way to do that really is to sort of test the waters out when you're working with a particular partner who's expressing interest. That might be asking them to make a list of other organizations that might be interested in sharing it, or potentially gauging interest in their community, doing some conversations with local community members and reporting back about interest or particular needs, or even identifying individual members of their community who might be interested in being ambassadors or supporters. So that ask of the potential partner, engaging whether they're engaged and able to come back and say, yeah, we did this, and this is what we think we can do to help, is a signal to people who are organizing the campaign that this is not only a willing partner, but one that has the resources and the attention to do that. And it's important when talking about those opportunities that to be able to offer different levels of participation. It might just be, as Angela mentioned earlier, sharing something on Facebook or on some of other social media channels, or it may be taking a more meaningful, like really direct role in promoting it heavily and hosting an event, or participating in the selection process in some degree, depending on the structure of the campaign. So that's going to vary by partner, and you want to make it open and accessible to everyone at the level that they're able to participate. Angela, anything in particular about sort of the variations there that you've seen?
Yeah, so as you can see from this picture, is when we had in-person press launches for our co-op. This was actually the Miami area. Multiple partners come to participate and wave their own respective organizational sign. That was tremendous working with earned media. That was a great effort, initiative to gain earned media. But in today's world, everything's sort of digital. So I'll give you an example. We have organizations that continue to partner with us, and maybe it's just sharing on Nextdoor because they're in the community and that makes sense. It's sharing on Facebook, it's tweeting. Or it's also attending a digital community information session and sharing a little tidbit about what they're doing in their respective organizations. And then thus they're also sharing that we have a community information session. So there's multiple levels of participation. And as Corey said, all is welcomed. Engaging that commitment and it being okay if it's something small or something larger. Partners have different levels, or at different levels they choose to participate, and then all are welcome.
Yeah. One of the great things I think we see in the work that we've done is even as at the individual level, we'll have people contact us and want to support it and are willing and able to set up a meeting or do something that has an impact just as an individual participant. So even leaving space for those folks who aren't affiliated with an organization to help can be a real benefit to the process. And that includes finding ambassadors and people who've already gone solar as supporters in the community too. They can be real champions for promoting an effort like this.
I really want to quickly add, for that last picture you see, you have someone that brought their EV, you have someone that brought their solar tiny home. So complementary organizations, it's really, we're all kind of lifting each other up. So we see that across our partnerships as well. They don't necessarily have to be all about rooftop solar, clean energy. It could be a multitude of things that really complement each other.
Yeah, we have found that EV drivers are willing to show up just about anywhere to show people their EVs, which is pretty neat. Next, last step here really is, and this one is not necessarily the public promotion part of it, which will come later, but really taking a moment and taking some time to connect the partners who've agreed to help to each other, not just because it's helpful to sort of cement those relationships for the campaign success, but also because this is an opportunity to facilitate relationships between community partners and organizations who may not know each other in your area. Some of them may work together already, but some of them may not. This is a chance for them to talk about the work that they do and to really make those connections independently and also in support of your campaign. So having a get together, a party, a Zoom, whatever that is, to really cement that those partnerships up front can be a really strong way to get off to a good start. And I think with that, I'll stop sharing my screen here and we'll take some questions. Thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes maybe for some quick questions, and then again, if we can't get to all of them, we'll follow up. So put those in the chat. So yeah, any questions?
I did want to have to give props to that last picture was a press conference in St. Petersburg, and I know Sharon Wright was somewhere in that picture, so shout out to St. Petersburg. It was our launch in, I believe it was 2016 or 2017, our first one.
I think that was 2018, January.
All right.
Really great presentation. I'm wondering, do you have any specific practices or ways that you get community feedback?
One thing that we do in feedback on the actual joining part is we ask people directly in the sign up form for what they're interested in the particular system. So do they want a local community installer? Do they care more about price and warranties? That's a very sort of concrete one from individuals who are joining the group. I'll let Angela comment on as far as opportunities for feedback from organizations that are supporting it.
Oh, absolutely. Throughout the process, we receive feedback on, throughout, like whether it's an information session or what information we should provide for a specific community in a specific location. And we can kind of tailor that and match that to the outreach that, let's say, the city or a partner organization is helping us with. And we might need more information with regard to energy efficiency. We've done that. In some areas in Florida, partnering with EV, but that feedback came from partner organizations and that typically complement the co-op process in general. Thank you.
Something else I want to just mention real quickly, which is something we try to be particularly aware of in our physical events before COVID, is selecting locations that are accessible for people in the community who may not be able to get someplace by public transportation, making sure that you've got a sort of a wide variety of locations where you're having events. And then as that translates into online space as well, making sure that if you have community members who need translation, to being able to incorporate that into a presentation, outreach materials in multiple languages. These are all things that you want to sort of consider depending on what communities you're trying to incorporate into the campaign.
I had a question. Thank you so much for your presentations. This is kind of regarding to staffing and capacity for the program itself. Can you give me an idea of whether it's an org chart or the different positions needed to kind of run this program?
Angela, you want to talk about that from the field perspective? I can certainly do the
Sure. So being in the field, we in many of our states we just have one. In the case of Texas, we have 2. In the case of Florida, we have 4. Or we have a regional lead. And we would, when we had things in person, we would have in-person information sessions, and they would manage the projects from beginning to end. It's full project management. But on the back end, and I can certainly share an example of one of our co-op sign-up pages. We have an incredible team, communications, Go Solar team that is led by Corey, that manages the back end infrastructure, that's looking at roofs, making sure that people have a good roof to move forward, answering the multitude of technical questions that come in daily, if not hourly, about is my proposal, is this correct? What about, how does this look like as far as my production? We have a whole team on the back end, and all of us really being remote, supportive really across the state. And as a region, as a regional director, the states that I manage, they're working together too. So it's a lot of troubleshooting, but it's all pretty much remote.
And I will just quickly note that the second workshop is where we'll really have an opportunity for everyone to delegate those roles and responsibilities. So we'd love for the community groups to be part of that second workshop to not only develop the goals for the campaign, but we have some worksheets to help kind of specify the roles and responsibilities for everyone. All right, maybe time for one more question to Angela or Corey before we go into the breakout exercises.
I see the question in the chat. Do you focus on LMI community orgs, neighborhoods only when creating maps and lists? No, we typically cast a wide net. I can say in Florida and many of our areas, it can be county-wide. And this is where we depend and work with partner organizations that help us identify those areas and the outreach strategies. But we do cast a wide net so that everyone within, say, the county or the geographic region that we would define with you is able to also sign up.
So the first thing, that I think is a really important step is to actually connect with those community groups and government partners to start building those necessary partnerships. So one of the outcomes we really want from this workshop is to get those partnerships in place so that going forward through this cohort, they're able to join these breakout sessions and, be a part of the goal setting and responsibilities and decision-making aspects. Another note that you can share access the content, both the recording worksheets as well as the material that we've typed up on our private website for this specific cohort. And I'll share the password with a follow-up email. And feel free to share that with the community partners as well to give them kind of a taste of what the process is going to look like. And the last note that I have is for you all to RSVP for our second workshop, which has changed from November 4th to October 28th due to trying to make it not the day after the election. And for that workshop invitation to other community groups, as well as let me know who's planning on attending to help with kind of the breakout session planning to make that easier on our end. And the last thing I'll note to reiterate here is that it's great to have those community partners in all of the future workshops going forward, so that they can be part of the kind of decision-making process. So with that, thanks everyone for joining. I'll stop sharing my screen, and yeah, feel free to give your neighbor a high five for joining today, up or down. But yeah, thanks for joining, and looking forward to seeing you all in about 2 weeks, and be on the lookout for a follow-up email from me later this week. Thanks all.